Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have a tiny, creepy hand. This small, lifelike bronze hand was found at the Roman fort of Vindolanda, which is near Hadrian's Wall in England. This artifact was found by archaeologists and it quickly became quite a mysterious find. The reason for this is because of the fact that it is believed that this artifact may have been associated with a cult. This cult, called Jupiter Dolichenes after the Roman god of course, is a mystery cult that held their secrets close to their chest. This secretive cult existed and was very popular with the Roman army around the 3rd century. This hand is believed to have been left as an offering after there was a major invasion of Scotland that left a large number of people dead. Little more about this bronze statue is known, and that just might make it even creepier. In our number 9 spot today, we have vampire remains. A few years ago in Poland, during a dig, researchers uncovered some skeletal remains that date back to the 14th century, and if this find wasn't already gruesome enough, they quickly figured out this wasn't where the story ended. These skeletons appeared to have posthumous injuries inflicted onto them. Wondering why? Someone's fear of vampires is probably to blame. The skeletons had been decapitated and punctured at the spine, which is extremely gruesome, and then the severed heads were wedged between heavy stones. This is what the lore at the time suggested was the appropriate actions for those who might be vampires in order to prevent them from rising from the dead again. As it turns out, as many of us now know, unfortunately many of these people who were said to be supernatural or evil were probably just suffering from diseases of life. According to researchers, during this time period, people who were suffering from things like kyphosis or perhaps cholera were often thought of as being vampires or witches. In our number 8 spot today, we have Jerry Bibb Balasag's gravestone. This tombstone goes hand in hand with an absolutely insane story of Jerry's life. The story of it is that Jerry, who was a professional wrestler, ended up vanishing after getting in trouble with the law. He was wanted for charges of fraud, and while no one knew his whereabouts for 6 months, when his mother picked up a magazine one day which featured the victims of the horrible cultist Jonestown massacre, she sadly saw her son's picture alongside all of the others. This led to there being a tombstone, of course made for Jerry, although his body would have already been buried in California. So this all happened in 1978, but let's flash forward to 1990. In that year, a man named Ricky A. Weta was arrested for attempting to take someone's life. He was fingerprinted upon his arrest, and who would have thought Ricky turned out to be none other than the presumed dead Jerry. The whole story was of course national news because how could this have possibly happened? In the end, Jerry was caught and brought to justice, but here's the thing, the tombstone. It's a reminder of the Jonestown massacre. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Vampire of Dusseldorf. If you've ever been to a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum, you know those places are stocked full of the weird and wonderful, and this item is absolutely no different. This Wisconsin museum holds the skull from the severed head of the Vampire of Dusseldorf, Peter Carton. Who is Peter? Well, this vampire man was actually a German serial killer from the 1930s. This man committed some incredibly atrocious acts for which he was tried and convicted. He ended up being found guilty for the killing of 9 people as well as attempting to take the lives of 7 more. This guilty verdict led to him being sentenced to beheading, which took place in 1931 when Peter was 48 years old. I'm not exactly sure why anyone would have wanted to keep his head and skull around, but clearly it happened and now people can go and visit it whenever they feel like it. This might be one museum I might stay away from, to be perfectly honest. I've learned about way too many cursed items here and don't want to mess around with this one. In our number 6 spot today, we have this Viking sword. Archaeologists found a Viking sword called Ulfberg that they were able to date somewhere from 800 to 1000 AD, but upon further research they were absolutely astounded at what they found. This sword was made with a level of sophistication that wasn't seen until at least 800 years later. The carbon content of the sword is 3 times higher than other swords of the time, and due to the impurities that were removed, the iron ore would have needed to be heated to at least 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. This sword was so hard to believe to researchers that a blacksmith named Richard Furrer made a sword similar to this one and used technology that would have been available at the time of its making. He said that the process was the most complicated thing he had ever made, and he even ended up using methods that weren't known to be used at the time. This is all super cool and stuff, but it has me wondering what this sword was used for and what dark parts of history it holds. In our number 5 spot today, we have shackled skeletons. On an archaeological dig in 2016, researchers uncovered a scary sight. Buried in the grounds in Athens, Greece, were at least 80 skeletons, all arranged in neat rows, all with iron shackles on their wrists. Stella Chrysolaki, who is the head of the excavation site, said, quote, "They're all tied at the hands with handcuffs, and most of them are very, very young and in a very good state of health when they were executed. This definitely adds a little bit of horror to this already gruesome scene." Apparently, the method of burial suggests that whoever these skeletons belonged to weren't just the average run-of-the-mill lawbreakers, and they may have been in trouble for some more serious crimes. It is believed that these skeletons might be the supporters of a man named Cylon. In 632 BC, Cylon, who was a former athlete, led an attempted coup in Athens. Of course, since I just called it attempted, it didn't work out, but apparently he then fled the city unharmed. Since he couldn't be punished for his crimes, that only leaves these souls who were just finally uncovered a few years ago. I know these are people who once lived and not artifacts, but I had to put them on this list today because this discovery and story are just something we have to be talking about. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Skirrid Inn Beam. The Skirrid Inn in Wales, upon first glance, just looks like a great place to enjoy some classic pub fare, maybe some fish and chips and a nice ale, but the history it holds tells a very different story because this used to be a place for public hangings. Seems like a weird spot for a pub now, doesn't it? The upper part of the inn used to be the courthouse where people were tried and convicted, and then if the case was made, they were executed on site. It is estimated that around 180 hangings took place right in that spot. They even made the weird decision to keep the original hanging beam up, and the grooves of where the rope wore into the wood can still be seen even to this day. Also, the inn has chosen to keep the original cells where the prisoners were kept just to add the maximum amount of creepiness to the entire place. It's probably haunted as well. This beam serves as a reminder of a different time, I guess, but if we're being totally honest, have things really changed all that much? In our number 3 spot today, we have these sacrificial offerings. In 2018, researchers sent some remote-operated robots beneath the ground in Peru at Chavín de Huántar. These robots stumbled on more than anyone ever imagined when they found a network of 35 interlocked underground tunnels dating back 3,000 years. This is already fascinating and cool, and I have a ton of questions about this whole series of mysterious tunnels, but we've got to save that for another video and instead talk about what it was they found inside of these tunnels, and that is the remains of at least 3 individuals. They had found more remains of other people, but these 3 skeletons specifically stood out because they weren't like the others. They weren't the skeletons of people who had high social standings. These remains they found were from people who were actually sacrificed in rituals. They were able to determine this because of the fact that these bodies were found face down under piles of rocks, which is of course not how people of a high social standing would have been buried at the time. This discovery certainly is a reminder of different times on Earth. In our number 2 spot today, we have an executioner axe. In a Swedish museum, there is an axe that dates back to between 1770 and 1866. This axe isn't just any old axe, however, as it once belonged to an executioner who used it on 88 people. Execution by axe, as you can imagine, was a lot more difficult in reality than movies make it seem, so these axes were specially designed. Rather than being a finely tuned piece of weaponry, these axes were simply designed to crush their way through flesh and vertebrae. I'll save you any more horrible descriptions and just say that the executioner didn't have an easy job for a variety of reasons, and it certainly was a job that required them to stay in great shape. Like I mentioned with the Skirrid Inn Beam, it's definitely good that things have changed since the days of public beheadings for capital punishment, but sometimes things don't really even seem all that different. In our number 1 spot today we have the Tower of Skulls. There's a city in Serbia that has an interesting tourist attraction. This tower dates back to a time when Serbia was still under Ottoman control in 1809. The first Serbian uprising was not going well, but the leader of the rebels, Stephen Dybbuk, was determined to do something to change that. During the final stand at Cigar Hill, Stephen fired a round into a keg of gunpowder which was inside of a fully stocked armory. You can only guess what this did. Of course, it caused a massive explosion that killed not only him and his men, but also all of the Turkish soldiers who were storming the trenches. In order to get their revenge on this move that Stephen made, the Turks then collected all of the rebels' bodies and removed their heads. They took the bodies of 952 rebels and sent them to Constantinople as trophies. And what did they do with the heads? Well, they built a tower, of course. This tower was 15 feet high and the Turks built it right at the entrance to town. The skull tower was intended to be a reminder to not mess with them, but the Serbians decided to use their new metal as heck skull tower to show them what they were really made of.
Starting off this countdown, we have the stolen artifact of Pompeii. This story has been in the news a lot lately. So after enduring 15 years of bad luck, a Canadian woman returned an artifact that she stole from Pompeii. So this woman, identified as Nicole, apparently stole some mosaic tiles, stones, pieces of plaster, and other little artifacts from the archaeological park of Pompeii during her trip there in 2005. 15 years later, she mailed the artifacts back with a note explaining that she experienced nothing but bad luck after taking the objects. She struggled both financially and physically. In the letter she wrote that she suffered from breast cancer twice. She wanted to put an end to the curse and didn't want her family to suffer from her actions, so she sent the pieces back.
Moving on to number 9, we have the lost treasure of the Lydian. This treasure was found back in the 60s, and it was seen as one of the best archaeological discoveries of its time. It was found in Turkey, and it was said that there were over 300 pieces of golden ware. If you were down there, you could have been balling out of control, wearing all that fancy jewelry and making yourself look like a stud. But you would quickly become overcome with gold sickness. This is the apparent curse that is attached to these treasures. Gold sickness is when someone will start to get ill over time, but also have an affinity to collect gold. It's like an uncontrollable urge to stockpile gold like you're some sort of dragon. You'll slurp up gold faster than Joey Chestnut scarfs down ice cream.
That's so cool.
This curse may have been solidified in 2006. One of the pieces was being returned from America to Turkey, and it was discovered to be a fake. That means someone made a replica and then stole the original. Could this curse have pushed them to make this theft, and now the person is somewhere hoarding large amounts of gold? Maybe this is why CEOs do whatever they can to collect large amounts of wealth they can never spend.
Coming in at number 8, we have the ballista balls. Back in the 1980s, a crew excavated hundreds of Roman ballista balls on the border of Israel and Syria. These were used as cannonballs during the Great Revolt. There were so many of them that one man decided to take 2. I mean, surely they wouldn't notice that 2 were missing, right? And honestly, he was right, no one noticed. But in 2015, the balls were returned to the museum's courtyard along with a note from the thief. The note read, and I quote, "I stole them in July 1995, and since then they have brought me nothing but trouble. Please do not steal antiquities." Use that as a warning, folks.
Coming in at number 7, we have voodoo dolls. I mean, we should know that these are not to be messed with, but for some reason people don't take cursed objects seriously, and they pay the price. A pair of voodoo dolls were stolen from an occult museum in New Orleans. The owner said that they noticed this and they didn't feel any sort of anger because they knew that the person who stole them would feel the fury of the dolls before the sun set on the city. When someone says something as ominous as that, you know that they mean business. She continued to say that the museum was the dolls' home and they will be wicked if they are not returned. Just 2 days later, a man returned with the dolls. Apparently he was missing teeth, missing fingernails, had pus coming out of his gums, and had sores all over his body. And outside of being in an extreme amount of pain, he said that he was haunted by visions of his own death. The museum owner laughed and told him to go to the hospital and gladly took back the dolls.
Moving on to number 6, we have the souvenir. Look, I get it. You go on a vacation somewhere and you want a souvenir or something to remember your trip by. But don't steal. Instead, just go get something from the local gift shop. I mean, that's what gift shops are there for. Now, one place in particular that is a hot spot for thieves is Arizona's Petrified Forest National Park. Over the years, thousands of individuals have stolen petrified forest rocks from there. One woman in particular stole an artifact, and this is what happened to her. She claims, and I quote, "Upon returning home, we first found out that my stepmother had kidney failure. Then our dog died. I had a really close call in having a bad auto accident. Our truck broke down needing major repairs. Our cat died. And last night a gas well blew out a cab, causing us to be evacuated from our home. So please take these pieces back before we have any more bad luck." Man, those objects are extremely cursed. So far, they have had 1,200 antiques returned back to them, all sent with letters saying that they were cursed with bad luck.
Coming in at number 5 is Little Bastard. This is one of the most famous cursed items of all time. This was a car driven by James Dean, and it would end up being his doom. But he didn't steal this cursed vehicle, but there were some people who definitely tried. After the accident that took the life of the famous movie star, the car was taken to a body shop where they started to strip it for parts. One night a group of thieves came in to take off with some parts from this car. Now we don't know if these people targeted the body shop or if they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, one of these thieves tried to strip a part off the engine and the whole thing came crashing down on top of him and killed him. The other two men got away swiftly, but that was just one of the many deaths connected to the Porsche 550 Spider.
In our fourth spot, we have King Tut's Cobra Staff. So of course, you all probably have heard the urban legend surrounding King Tut and his curse. Basically, it said that King Tut's tomb and all the artifacts that were inside are cursed. And this might indeed be true. After the expedition of King Tut's tomb, several men mysteriously died. Well, rumor has it that this happened all because one of the men stole King Tut's Cobra Staff. Archaeologist Howard Carter claimed that when they found King Tut's tomb, it was already robbed. But this may have been a cover-up. It's thought that him and his team took a couple of artifacts as souvenirs, in particular the Cobra Staff. In fact, one of Carter's team members, James Henry Breasted, returned home to find his pet canary eaten by a cobra, and the cobra was still in the cage. Cobra Staff goes missing, and a cobra is found in his home. Coincidence? I think not.
Coming at number 3, we have Timir's body. When you take a dude out of his tomb, is that stealing? I think so. During World War II, Joseph Stalin had the bright idea that he would mess around with some dark magic during a pivotal moment of the war. I don't know if he was a superstitious man, but I think he should have been, because maybe he could have prevented this. Timur was one of the most ruthless conquerors in history. It said that 17 million people died because of this dude. He was at the helm of one of the largest empires in history. On his tomb it said, "He who disturbs me shall unleash an enemy more ruthless than I." And on the day that Stalin dug up Timur, Hitler did his surprise attack on the Soviets. Bad move, Stalin. Sounds like you really dropped the ball on this one. Well, I think that Stalin is a stubborn dude and didn't want to bury him again, but eventually he broke and decided that the curse was real and buried Timur again. And then the Soviets had their first victory against the Germans.
In our second spot, we have the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Back in 2004, an unnamed German man stole an ancient Egyptian artifact displaying hieroglyphic text. A couple of months later, the artifact was sent back to Egypt by the man's son. The man had died, so he couldn't do it himself. Apparently, shortly after returning home from his trip, the man's health randomly started to decline. He got unexplained paralysis and fevers. Shortly after, he developed cancer and died. The man's son believed that his father was subjected to the Pharaoh's curse, and he sent the artifact back in hopes to end it.
And coming in at the number 1 spot is the most evil car in America, the 1964 Dodge 330. This vehicle will go down in history as one of the most horrific four-wheelers to ever meet the blacktop. This thing has a ton of spooky events that have been tied to it. It started off as a police cruiser. You think something that had the purpose of serving up justice would have a noble heart. Well, if you had that opinion about this car, you would be dead wrong. There were 3 officers who had the misfortune of driving the 330, and each one of them would die in a murder suicide. It eventually worked its way into the public, and the first owner said that the car seemed like it was constantly trying to kill her, as the doors would fly open and the steering would jam while she was on the highway. Eventually a church caught wind of this devil's chariot, and they went to go vandalize it so no one could drive it again. Every last person involved in this mission died. Some of them were decapitated and others were struck by lightning. Eventually the car was stolen and taken to a chop shop, and where it was broken down into parts, and these parts were separated into different corners of the world so this car could never harm anyone again. God damn.
So moral of the story here, don't steal artifacts. You know what, just don't steal in general. Learn from all these people's mistakes.
Unless you're pirating movies, that's totally fine.
It's not fun.
Coming in number 10, we have the Sarcophagus of Menkaure. The Great Pyramids house some of the most important people of their day. You have to imagine if thousands of people died to build a monument just to put a dead body in, then you'd have to be someone pretty important. I'll be lucky if my ashes get kept in a mayonnaise jar. But one of the pyramids of Giza was the Sarcophagus of Menkaure. This was found by British explorer Howard Vyse. This should be no surprise, this was back in the 1800s, and we all know how much the English loved to come through and take everything. One of the craziest things about Vyse's excavation of the pyramids was the fact that he used explosives to blast his way inside. This dude clearly had a ton of respect for the architecture. Eventually, this guy's demolition style of getting into a pyramid got him what he wanted. He was face to face with the Sarcophagus of Menkaure. He hauled this thing out and then he slapped it on a boat to send it back to England. Well, on the way back, the boat sank, and since then, the treasure has been lost to man. Coming in at number 9, we have the menorah of the Second Temple. The English weren't the only ones who would go around taking cool stuff from cool places. I mean, let's be honest. If we go back in time far enough, we will find that every group of people took things from everywhere. Well, the Romans thought that they would take a trip down to Jerusalem to steal the menorah of the Second Temple. They didn't destroy it, but they brought it back to the Temple of Peace. That is a very strange thing to call a place where you keep a bunch of stolen artifacts from foreign places. Like, oh, this is the Temple of Peace? How did you get that menorah? Ruthless bloodshed? Yeah, that seems nice. Well, the Temple of Peace was eventually burnt to the ground, and it's unknown if the menorah of the Second Temple survived this. Really, there's two options here. Either it was destroyed along with the temple, or it was taken to Carthage by a group of people called the Vandals. And guys, remember to hit that like button because it really helps us out. Coming in at number 8, we have the Barber Dimes. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when I say the Barber Dimes is me walking out with a fresh haircut. You know what I'm saying? But this is actually something much more valuable than me looking really good. The Barber Dimes were minted back in 1907, and they used to be very common, but now there's only a few of them left. That's not the part that makes this story so interesting. There is a treasure of missing Barber Dimes that could be somewhere in Colorado. 6 massive barrels of Barber Dimes were transported through Colorado, and back in 1907, they never showed up to their destination. They could have been stolen, or they could have fallen into the Colorado Black Canyon. If you were to find this stash of dimes today, because of how rare they are and how many there are, they would be worth millions of dollars. So, not a bad find. Coming in at number 7, we have Sappho's poems. Sappho is considered one of the greatest minds of ancient Greece, and while there's quite a bit of her work that the world has been able to salvage, it would seem that her poems were lost to the world. I'm not one to dip into poems that often, or really ever, but it would have been so interesting to see what poetry looked like in ancient Greece. Also, so much of the literature and knowledge from that era was written and cataloged by men. So it would be cool to see what that era looked like through the eyes of a woman. I mean, I suspect that it would all be insightful pieces that opened up my mind, but they might have just been love stories or the regular frustrations of typical poetry. I don't know, dude. They were lost and we can't read them. I would hope that one day we find these poems and everyone thinks that they're beautiful and they change the way we interact with each other, but when she wrote them, she thought that they all sucked. That would be very funny. Coming in number 6, we have the Lost Library of the Moscow Tsars. One of the greatest groupings of ancient writings was put together by the Grand Duchy of Moscow. He collected writings from several ancient civilizations, including the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and it's thought that many others were also housed in this place. The location and contents of this library were always very secret. It became an even bigger secret when Ivan the Terrible was in power. It said that Ivan hid the library so the knowledge would never leak into anyone's hands except his own. Well, we know that Ivan was eventually killed in a revolution, and it's thought that the location of the library was also lost with him. Either that or the people revolting decided to burn the writings, not knowing what they were or how to read them. Or the library could still be somewhere out in Moscow waiting to be discovered. It would be a great find that would open up the world to a priceless collection of literature from a almost forgotten time. Coming in at number 5, we have Blackbeard's treasure. Blackbeard spent 2 long years out at sea as a pirate. Before that, he worked as a privateer and probably thought the money was trash, and that's why he turned to sinking boats and stealing booty. The boat he rode on was the Queen Mary's Revenge, which is one of the most badass things I have ever heard. But eventually, the law caught up with him and his head was chopped off. But this dude was a little rascal. Before he died, he let everyone know that he had a massive treasure buried somewhere, but he didn't tell anyone where it was. Now, this might have been a pirate's bluff. Something to send out to the world so he would never be forgotten and send a bunch of hopeful men out to sea looking for something that wasn't there. Or maybe he was telling the truth and there's a multi-million-dollar prize hidden away somewhere. Coming in at number 4, we have the Bayeux Tapestry's final panels. Recording history before the printing press was hard. You had to either write everything down by hand or make a super long tapestry like this one. There's no recording it on your phone and then uploading it into the cloud where it will live forever in a file that no one will ever look at. The Bayeux Tapestries was created when William the Conqueror smashed through England and reshaped Europe forever. People think it took years to make, but the last chunk is missing, so there's no conclusion to the story. To this day, no one knows where these final panels are. That would be like if thousands of years from now, someone dug up the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything was there right up to the point where Thanos grabbed the gauntlet from Stark and then it stopped. You know how much that would suck, dude? Give me the end of the story. I need it. I didn't even know this thing was missing until right now, and I'm already rattled. Coming in at number 3, we have JFK's brain. Here's a very strange one. Someone went out of their way to take the brain of the President of the United States after he was assassinated. No one knows who took his brain or where his brain went. There's a lot of theories about this. Some people think it could have been the FBI or the CIA to cover up that there was a second shooter. Other people think that his brother took his brain as evidence. Some people think that the government hid his brain because it revealed that he was slowly dying from some sickness and they wanted that to be hidden from the public. No matter what the case, it seems like it would be pretty hard to lose track of someone's brain when that someone is the president who was just assassinated by being shot in the head. The brain would be something you would want to hold on to for a very long time. Coming in at number 2, we have the Honjo Masamune. This is the last known sword made by the person believed to be the best sword maker of all time. The sword was made somewhere between 1260 and 1340 and passed down from generation to generation. It probably would have outlasted all of us because the craftsmanship is so exquisite, but after World War II there was an order from the Allies to take all weapons from Japanese people in Japan. This stretched to even historical weapons. Once it passed hands from its last owner to the Allied forces, its location was lost to man. The sword might have been thrown in the ocean, it might have been melted down, it might have been stolen and now is kept somewhere safe. But if you are the greatest sword maker in Japan, then that would put you in the running for the greatest sword maker in the world who has ever made swords ever. So this weapon that now is lost could be the greatest remaining sword on the planet. And coming into the number 1 spot, we have Genghis Khan's grave. Probably one of the most ruthless conquerors of all time, this dude had the largest empire in history. The Mongolians are the only people to beat Russia in a land war in the winter. He spread his seed so much that 1% of the planet has his DNA, and he killed so many people that it actually lowered the temperature of the planet. And if we look back to where he came from, he basically was living in a village of tents. You want to talk about started from the bottom, now you're here? This guy did it bigger than anyone. And to cap all of this off, after he was done, he didn't want to be remembered. He didn't want anyone to pray to him or fear him or use him as a force to control other people. He wouldn't let anyone paint a picture of him when he was alive, so anything we see of him was made after he died. So all these images could be highly inaccurate, and he also hid the location of his grave. Genghis Khan requested that he be buried at an unmarked grave in the heart of the Burken Khaldan Mountains. Then everyone who was part of the burial was killed so no one would know the location, and it's rumored that horses were released up the hills so no one could follow tracks. Obviously this guy caused more death than anyone else, but this is still something crazy.
Number 10, the Ark of the Covenant. If you've seen Indiana Jones, then you're probably familiar with the relic that is known as the Ark of the Covenant. According to the Hebrew Bible, God told Moses to create the Ark of the Covenant in order to store the original tablets on which were written the original 10 Commandments. They did so, making it out of acacia wood and covering it in gold. Around 3,000 years ago, the first temple was built in Jerusalem and the Ark was stored within it until 587 BC when the temple was destroyed. After that, it's not known where the Ark is or what happened to it. Some people saying that it was hidden before the temple was destroyed, while one legend claims that the Ark will not be revealed until the coming of the Messiah, son of David. Some people believe that the Ark was taken to Ethiopia and is stored within a church there, but one scholar said that he had seen this alleged Ark back in World War II and that it's not the original. The Ark of the Covenant is said to have incredible powers such as instant death if you were to touch it, so if it did come back, who knows what it would be used for. Number 9. Noah's Ark. A very famous story from the Bible tells the tale of Noah, who built a massive boat to hold 2 of every animal to save them from a massive flooding of the earth. The flood took place because God believed that man was becoming too wicked, so he picked the person he believed most righteous, Noah, to survive on the ship with his family and the animals in order to repopulate the planet afterwards. After the 150 days of flooding, the ark apparently came to rest on top of the mountains of Ararat. This mountain does actually exist in eastern Turkey, though I think we would have noticed by now if there was a giant boat sitting up there. Many explorers have gone in search of the ark but have yielded no results, most people these days believing that it was just a mythical story and never actually happened. In order to house that many animals, Noah's Ark would have needed to be absolutely massive, so if the boat is out there somewhere, it's probably just small pieces of it. Number 8. The real cross. Across the globe, there are hundreds of pieces of wood that people claim to have come from the original cross that Jesus was crucified on. However, it's unlikely that any of these 2x4s actually came from the cross. During the Middle Ages, religious relics were incredibly popular, and supposed pieces of the cross were popping up all over the place, more than could make any sense. Theologian John Calvin famously said that if all these alleged pieces of the cross were gathered together, they would fill the cargo hold of an entire ship. These fake relics aren't just a thing of the past though, and are still incredibly popular today. One relic seller on eBay was reported to have sold many pieces of the cross for around $500 a pop. Right now, there is no piece of the cross that all scholars can agree is authentic, and it's likely that a true remnant will never actually be found, this being because it would have been made of wood and would have decomposed a long time ago. Number 7. The Copper Scroll. The Dead Sea Scrolls were a series of religious manuscripts that were discovered in the mid-1900s in, you guessed it, the Dead Sea. One of the most unusual of these scrolls is known as the Copper Scroll, it getting this name because it is of course inscribed in copper. The text on the scroll describes the hiding places of vast quantities of treasure, including up to 65 metric tons of gold and silver objects. Unfortunately, we haven't actually been able to find any of these treasures, and that's because the hiding places described on the scroll are incredibly cryptic, it not being your typical X marks the spot buried treasure map. They describe the treasure as being hidden in places like in the Great Cistern, which is in the courtyard of the Little Colonnade, and in the eastward looking cave of the Pillar with 2 entrances. Yeah, definitely pretty vague. Whether or not these treasures actually exist is also up for debate. Some people saying they were real and captured by the Romans, and some people saying that they were just totally made up. Number 6. The Q source. The Q source is the name of a hypothetical text that supposedly was used to help write the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. Most historians believe that the Gospel of Mark was the earliest Christian gospel, and that it and the Q source were used to help the authors of the Gospel of Matthew and Luke write their texts. Archaeologists have so far been unable to find the Q source, leading some people to believe that instead of a written text, it was actually just an oral tradition that was passed down. While there are many copied copies of the famous Christian Gospels, scholars believe it's unlikely that a written Q source would have had many versions, which is what's making it so hard to find to this day. The contents of the Q source is apparently apparently mostly Jesus' sayings, but I guess we'll never know for sure unless a written Q source is actually someday discovered. Number 5. The burial shroud. It's well known that after Jesus' crucifixion, he was buried within a cave, being sealed in behind a large stone. The part of the story that's up for debate is whether or not Jesus actually rose from the dead 3 days later, but we know for a fact he was a real guy who was actually buried in that cave. Mark 15:46 says, "Then Joseph bought a linen cloth, and taking down the body, wrapped it in the linen cloth, and laid it in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock. He then rolled a stone against the door of the tomb." Many explorers and historians have gone in search of the linen cloth, or shroud, that Jesus was buried in. There have been numerous forgeries over the years, most famously the Shroud of Turin, which was actually created in the Middle Ages. What happened to the real shroud remains unknown to this day, and people say that it's unlikely we'll ever actually be able to find it. Number 4. The Ring of St. Edward. In the year 1005, St. Edward the Confessor was born into the royal family, and in 1042, he took the throne. He was viewed by the people as a deeply religious leader who did many good things, like removing unjust taxes, healing the sick, and taking a vow of chastity. He also built a cathedral that would come to be known as Westminster Abbey. St. Edward healed the sick using a sapphire ring that he had, and one day he was approached by a beggar who asked him for money. He didn't have any money on him, so he instead removed his ring and gave it to the beggar. Years later, pilgrims who were stranded in the Holy Land were rescued by St. John the Evangelist, who had the ring that Edward had given the beggar. He told the pilgrims to return to Edward and give him the ring, and to tell him that he would be dead in 6 months. And he was. The ring was kept in Westminster Abbey for many years, but it and many other relics went missing after the dissolution of the monastery. To this day, the ring has not been located, though it's believed that the sapphire from the ring is the center jewel on the imperial state crown. Number 3. The Veil of Veronica. The story of the Veil of Veronica was not recorded in its current form until the Middle Ages, and tells the story of a meeting between Saint Veronica and Jesus. She encountered Jesus along the Via Dolorosa and stopped to use her veil to wipe the blood and sweat from his brow. When she did so, Jesus' image became copied onto the veil. After that moment, it then apparently gained mythical powers, like quenching thirst, allowing the blind to see, and even raising people from the dead. There is written evidence that the veil was displayed in the 13th to 15th centuries, but after 1527, its fate is unknown. Some people believe that it was destroyed in Rome, or had even been stolen and made its way through taverns. After its disappearance, many copies started to pop up, despite the Pope prohibiting them from being made. In 1629, he then ordered that all copies of the veil be destroyed, and if you refused to give up your copy, you would be excommunicated from the church. Number 2. The Nephilim. In the Bible, the Nephilim were a group of incredibly large and strong beings who lived both before and after the flood, being described as being the offspring of fallen angels and human women. Many critics of the Bible laugh at its description of supposed giants, but if these creatures actually existed, it means that there are probably remains of them out there somewhere. Giant human skeletons that would squash any doubt that they had existed. Archaeological evidence from the ancient times does exist that could show the existence of giants, though it has never really been fully analyzed, as most people brush it off as not having been possible or real. There are other recordings and even art pieces that may also lend credit to the fact that these giants had once existed, and many people believe that the skeletal evidence is out there somewhere, just waiting to be discovered. Number 1. The Holy Grail. If you've seen Monty Python, then you're probably pretty familiar with this one. The Holy Grail, or the Holy Chalice, is the cup that Jesus apparently used during the Last Supper, which he had with his disciples before his crucifixion. The Bible says, "Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" It's unknown what happened to the Grail after this dinner, but there are a few medieval legends surrounding it. During the reign of King Arthur, many people believed that the cup had magical properties, and Arthur took his knights on a quest to try and find the Grail. Some people believe that Joseph of Arimathea, the man who had buried Jesus, had traveled to Britain and taken the cup with him. As some scholars think the Last Supper might have never even happened, we'll probably never be able to find the true Holy Grail.
Starting off this countdown, we have King Tut's dagger. Upon excavating the tomb of King Tut in 1925, scientists discovered a long 34-centimeter dagger wrapped up with King Tut. Now, back then there was no way for them to do studies on the dagger without damaging it. However, an X-ray done in 1970 showed that the dagger was made of some interesting compounds, primarily nickel and iron. Back then, iron was considered very rare. And how could it have been composed of iron when his burial predated Egypt's Iron Age by nearly 2,000 years? So right there, that's a little shocking. As a result of the iron and nickel composition, scientists have declared it was made from extraterrestrial metal. Now, there are two theories here. One is that a meteorite crashed down and then they used that to make the dagger. Theory 2 is that the dagger was made by aliens and dropped or left by them accidentally. I mean, some honestly do think that the ancient Egyptians were in contact with aliens. If that's the case, then the dagger might have originally been from the ETs.
Coming in number 9 is the Dropa stones. The Dropa stones are maybe the wildest discovery when it comes to artifacts from space. These are basically CDs from 10,000 years ago that have a whole story on them that talk about aliens crash landing on Earth and then giving some tools to humans. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. These stones were found in a cave in China. At first glance, they seem to have hieroglyphs all over them and almost like they were created for a phonograph. When deciphered, there was a whole story of aliens coming to Earth that were named the Dropa. They crashed on Earth, met humans in the area, gave them tech, fixed their ship, and then bounced. When you play these Dropa discs, they hum and vibrate like they're creating some sort of energy. And that is where all the research stops. On the record, these things were just put away and no one ever looked at them again. But you and I both know that is a bunch of horse poop. These were obviously taken somewhere to be researched behind a watchful eye.
Coming in at number 8, we have the US Delta II rocket. Back in January of 1997, a woman named Lottie Williams was out minding her own business on a nice little walk. To her surprise, she was greeted by a streak of light in the sky. All of a sudden, she felt something brush her shoulder. Turns out that this thing that brushed her was part of a US Delta II rocket. The rocket was launched in 1996. A year later, it came crashing down in pieces. Lottie said when she felt something brush by, she turned around and saw something on the ground. It was a small piece of burnt mesh. Now she is extremely lucky because had it been a bigger piece, it probably would have knocked her down and killed her. Here's the thing, analysis shows that it's most likely part of the Delta II rocket. Most likely, still not 100% confirmed. For all we know, that could be a piece from an alien spacecraft.
Coming in at number 7, we have the pyramids. Here's the thing, do I actually think that pyramids came from space? Do I think that aliens came down from space and came to humans and were like, dudes, we're aliens, we're from the future, we got tech, it's so cool, it's gonna blow your socks off and we're gonna make a civilization so sick with some big triangles that come out of the ground and you can put your coolest dead bodies in them. No, I don't think that. I think that the pyramids were made with an insane amount of manpower because back then life was cheaper than it is now and you could just have an army of slaves move rocks until they physically couldn't and then could just bring in a new army. That's how I think they did it. Also, no one had a phone back then so you couldn't even get distracted while you were on the job. What are you gonna try and do, build a sandcastle? That would have been impossible because there was literally no water around. But that being said, there are a lot of people who think that the pyramids could have been built by some alien coming down to Earth and giving humans the tools to build these monuments with the precision of having them pointing at north, east, south, and west, with some people thinking that they are power plants that could create electricity. I think most of the people who think that have never been to Egypt, but you know it's good to make those assumptions after watching 30 minutes worth of YouTube videos.
Moving on to number 6, we have the Russian tank. In March of 2011, a man was out hiking in northwestern Colorado when he came across something strange. The object was round and warm to touch. It was also in a crater, meaning whatever this was had just crashed down from space. The hiker then called military aerospace officials. Later, it was revealed that this weird object was the tank from a Russian Zenit 3 rocket. The rocket was launched in January. 2 months later, it came crashing back down. Fun fact, it's one of only a handful of space debris to be found in the US. But seriously, imagine being out for a walk and seeing something fly towards you from the sky. Like damn, that's another thing to worry about, being killed by space debris.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Roman Decahedron. Some sort of 3D octagon, and no one knows what they do. Like 0 people have been able to figure out what these things were for, and one of the weirdest parts about them is that we have found a lot of them. They seem to all come from the Roman era and were moved out to every territory that the Romans controlled. There are over 100 of these strange devices that have been found, and there are several guesses as to what they could do. Some people think they could have been some sort of status symbol. To have one in your home would have meant you were rich and in good graces with the Emperor of Rome. They might have just been decoration, or they could have been some sort of communication device from space, and it's how the Romans were able to be so powerful.
In our 4th spot, we have the Roswell rock. This rock is a very weird rock with a detailed design. The rock is uniform in color, unusually smooth, and has a design protruding from the surface of it. This rock was found in Roswell, New Mexico in 2004 by a man named Robert Ridge. He was a deer hunter. Apparently he found this rock half sticking out of the ground and was shocked by its unusual and perfect design, as well as its strange magnetic properties. Upon analyzing it, people have realized that the rock's design actually matches a crop circle that was found in England in 1996, which makes this whole thing that much weirder. Now, some are convinced that this rock is some message sent by aliens. After experts have analyzed the design, they notice that it's a pattern of a sun and a moon inside of a circle. A woman named Linda Moulton Howe, who's an investigative journalist, believes that aliens are trying to teach us about astronomy with this rock, or that the rock contains a date for some event that has or will happen. It's pretty spooky. I just wish we knew more about this weird rock.
Coming in number 3, we have fungus. When you look at all the living beings on this planet, why has fungus got its own spot? I mean, those things are just plants, right? Wrong. Fungus are some of the most advanced life forms on the planet. They have functionality that spreads in extreme diversity from species to species. Some of them have the ability to mind control a host and then kill it so it spreads spores. Others have advanced communication techniques that allow them to find the most direct routes to one another. Because of this, there's speculation that fungus might have come here by aliens or might have touched down on Earth via meteor.
And at number 2, we have the Betts Mystery Sphere. On March 27, 1974, the Betts family were out examining a small bushfire near their property. While doing so, the family came across a completely smooth metal sphere. It was about the size of a bowling ball. On this sphere, there was a triangle engraved in it. They took it home only to find that it had strange properties. One day when their son was playing his guitar in the same room as this sphere, it started to emit a throbbing sound from it. The sound was strong enough to hurt the family's dog's ears. This sphere can also change directions, so if you push it across the floor, it will roll forward and then stop and then roll back all on its own. It's also said to be able to absorb power from solar energy. It's said to be more active when exposed to the sun. Now, they refused to let anyone analyze it until they linked the sphere to paranormal activity that was happening around the house. Like doors would slam by themselves and they would hear this weird organ music. Now, scientists have analyzed it and they said it was just a normal sphere. How late? But the family is convinced that something is controlling it. Maybe something of the extraterrestrial nature. Seriously, where did this sphere come from and what's the deal with its weird properties? Seems like it came from space.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have alien coins. So who do we always see plastered on coins? Well, it's our most rich and famous people, the ones that define our culture at the time, or the rulers that control the area, and if you don't put their face on the money, they will for sure cut your head off. Well, then there's a bunch of questions as to why some alien coins were found in Egypt. There was a massive renovation done on some homes in Egypt, which dug up one of the strangest artifacts to date. They were a series of coins that were found that had not a queen's head on them or a pharaoh, but an alien dude, like the one that looks like he's pulled right out of the movies, like the green dude with the big head and the green skin, and you know, all that stuff going on. You guys know what I'm talking about. But this dude had like a toga on, so he kind of looked a little bit boss. There were also several coins that were found that seemed to have spaceships on them. If the ruler theory is right, there could have been an alien ruler who came down from the stars in ancient Egypt, someone who maybe crash landed and needed to get his ship fixed, and while he was waiting for his repairs to be done, he was worshipped like a god.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Dropa stones. In 1938, archaeologist Dr. Chipote led an expedition near the Bayanhar Mountains in China. That's when they came across some interesting caves. These caves held evidence that ancient life once lived in them. After searching the caves, they found weird discs buried under thick layers of dust. These discs resembled phonograph records. Researchers dated them to be over 10,000 years old. Now, they didn't play music like a typical record, but instead they had hieroglyphics carved into them. When studied, it told a story about a spaceship that crashed into the mountains. Aboard the spaceship were people that called themselves the Dropa. Then later on, the discs were sent to Moscow for further studying. That's when they were placed on this special turntable, and the discs would vibrate or hum in a weird rhythm, as if an electric charge was passing through them. After that, research on the discs stopped. Or some believe research continued and they found/contacted alien life, which they just didn't tell the public. Either way, this is said to be one of the most mysterious artifacts in the world. In our 9th spot, we have the alien. And guys, here's just your little friendly reminder to hit that thumbs up button. In 2017, a man in Cusco made a pretty terrifying discovery in the southern desert of Peru. The artifact he found looks exactly like a tiny, mummified alien head. An X-ray concluded that the skull had very alien-type features. The skull had angled eyelids with shallow eye sockets, 2 nostrils, and a narrow slit-type mouth. Now, whoever was in possession of the skull actually covered it in a type of clay, so that's what you see on the top of it, which makes it appear to look more like an alien. Researchers discovered that it is indeed a real skull, but they don't know what it belonged to. So it may just be that this skull belonged to a real-life alien from space. Moving on to number 8, we have the Wedge of Aiud. Back in 1974, construction workers in Romania were working in a village in Aiud when they came across some pretty weird objects. These objects were buried 30 feet in the sand by a river. 2 of the objects were bones from mastodons, which are very distant relatives of an elephant. I mean, that's cool and all, but the thing that really caught their attention was this mysterious wedged-shaped object that was located by the bones. This object contained 89% aluminum, 6% copper, and a total of 12 elements altogether. Here's the thing. Aluminum was discovered around 1825, yet this wedge lay next to bones that are from 11,000 years ago. The timeline just doesn't add up. The wedge itself is theorized to be around 10,000 years old. People believe that this object couldn't have existed way back then. An aeronautical engineer stated that this object looks exactly like a piece of a landing gear for landing aircrafts. This has left researchers to believe that aliens crashed their craft from space maybe 11,000 years ago. In our 7th spot, we have the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is a piece of a stone slab found in 1799. It has a message carved into it written in 3 different types of scripts. You got ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, Demotic scripts, and ancient Greek. This stone is the key to decipher Egyptian scripts. In 1814, British scientist Thomas Young started studying the stone and made some progress on cracking it. But it wasn't until 1822 to 1824 that the hieroglyphic code was finally cracked. This was done by French linguist Jean-François Champollion. It's hypothesized that the slab was created in Egypt in 196 BC, but we still don't know who created it. Now, this one is more of a conspiracy, but it's actually thought that the Rosetta Stone was made by aliens, and they delivered it to us from space. Obviously, there's no solid evidence to support this. In fact, archaeologist Paul Wasson believes the Rosetta Stone has lessons to teach us about creating a message that will allow us to communicate with aliens. Because, you know, we can't just assume that aliens speak English. In our 6th spot, we have the UFO tooth wheel. This is another artifact that is said to have come from aliens in space. So basically, back in the day, a Russian man was using coal to heat his home when he saw something sticking out of a piece of coal. He reported his findings, and researchers said it looked like a tooth wheel to some device. After tests were run on it, it was discovered that it was composed of 98% aluminum and 2% magnesium. Now remember what I said before? Humans discovered how to first make aluminum in 1825. But the piece of coal this artifact was found in was 300 million years old. So how is that even possible? In fact, the tooth wheel resembles parts that we currently use in microscopes and electronic devices. Again, back in the day, they didn't have any of those devices, so what the heck. Scientists are still running tests on this object to one day figure out who created it and figure out what its original purpose was. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the iron beads. Back in the day, it was found that ancient Egyptians created iron beads. They were carefully hammered into thin sheets, and then they would roll these into tubes. Then they would string them together and make a necklace. While studying them, they found the necklaces were over 5,000 years old. It was also revealed that the beads were made out of pieces from meteorites, and then they would hammer that down. Not only that, but it was revealed that the Egyptians had a more advanced understanding of metalsmithing than we originally thought. Moving on to number 4, we have the valuable meteorite. There's a meteorite out there that is more valuable than gold. It was April 23, 2019, and a weird colorful orb flew across the skies of Costa Rica. It was orange and green in color. This object was about the size of a washing machine. And then, just like that, it broke up into pieces that got scattered between 2 villages. One of the pieces was discovered by a woman named Marcia Campos Munoz. She heard the rumble and saw something crash down on her property. She was one of the few people to find a piece of this meteorite. Now, meteorites show up all the time on Earth, so what's so special about this one? Well, it turns out they belong to a rare class called carbonaceous chondrites. They formed when the solar system was still developing. It's believed that these pieces of meteorites will help us figure out what early solar system life was like. Moving on, at number 3, we have the ancient battery. Back in 1936, outside of Baghdad, a weird discovery was made. They discovered a small clay jar with an iron rod hanging in a copper cylinder in it. This was then soldered shut and sealed with asphalt. Upon analyzing it, it was discovered to produce small amounts of electricity. In fact, researchers said it looks like an ancient battery. However, we still don't know who created this and what its purpose was. But many people believe that this was a battery from an alien spacecraft that crashed down on Earth several thousands of years ago. Aliens are said to be very advanced species, so it could be that they figured out batteries and electricity way before humans ever did. Coming in at number 2, we have the alien spacecraft. In 2017, a Hawaiian man with a telescope spotted this weird object leaving the solar system. This object was named Oumuamua, and it's considered the first known interstellar object detected passing through the solar system. Here's the thing. Many people believe that this thing is an alien spacecraft. Let me explain. This thing looks like a space rock, but it's not a comet or asteroid. It's too small and oddly shaped to be an asteroid. The thing is long and shaped like a rocket. No asteroids that we know of are shaped like that. Not only that, but astronomers thought the first space rock to enter our solar system would be a ball of ice and rocks. A comet. But usually there's a cloud of dust and gas surrounding comets, and this object doesn't have that. So then what on earth is it? On top of that, it's said to emit blue colors from it. As a result, rumor has it that it's actually an alien spacecraft. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Hypatia stone. In 2013, a weird stone made its way to Earth from space. This stone has managed to leave scientists baffled. They claim it's unlike any other extraterrestrial rock ever found. In 2015, while analyzing the stone, they found it was not part of a meteorite or comet. So they were puzzled as to where it came from. Researcher Jan Kramer said, and I quote, "The stone's matrix contains a high amount of very specific carbon compounds, called polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or PAH, a major component of interstellar dust, which existed even before our solar system was formed." Meaning, this stone is super old, like it was around before the sun and planets had formed. It's mind-blowing, and they still haven't found out all about it.
Coming in number 10, we have the Antikythera mechanism. Mapping out the stars is something that many civilizations have done throughout history. I mean, it's pretty hard not to be blown away by what is floating around above you in this massive net of lights and endless void of blackness, but it was more than this. The stars could be used to map out directions so you could know where you're going in the dead of night when the sun wasn't being kind enough to show you which direction you needed to head in. The Antikythera mechanism was maybe the most advanced form of mapping out the stars we have ever seen from ancient civilizations. There's a series of gears and systems almost like a massive clock. It has two sides that were most likely used for mapping out different things. But the wild thing about this archaeological find is that to this day we don't know exactly what it was used for. The thing is just too complex. I wonder what type of thing that we have today that no one will be able to find out what it was used for in the future. Is it going to be Heelys or something? Like, why did they want wheels on their shoes? Was it for speed? Was it for fashion? Turns out it's for both, baby. Gotta go fast, gotta look good. If that isn't a slogan already, it should be. Coming in at number 9, we have the Pires Res map. I think one of the coolest and worst jobs you could have had back in the day would have been an explorer. I mean, you could go and find a new land and literally become famous because of your discoveries. You could get knighted and everyone in the world would want to hear your stories about traveling across the globe to see some of the most exotic things the world has to offer. But at the same time, you would have to spend months at a time on a boat with only dudes, and then you might end up in a place that is so insanely cold you lose some of your fingers and toes. Or you could be in a jungly area that has a tiger that is trying to kill you and you have literally never seen a tiger before in your life. But for Piri Rez, things seemed to work out alright. The dude was from Hungary and it seemed that he had such a great understanding of the world that people thought he could have come from the future. The dude had a map that broke down the location of Antarctica 200 years before it was officially discovered and disclosed to the world. This means that this man had a better understanding of the world than anyone around him. There's also the fact that he mapped out missing continents that have disappeared. I would love a new continent. I really just want a new culture of people so I can try a new food that I didn't even know existed. It's the main reason I want aliens to be real, so they can come here and give me food. Coming in at number 8, we have the Hindu bell. Answer this question. How did an old brass bell that looks like it has some carvings in it that look like a Hindu god end up in a mine in West Virginia encased in a lump of coal that was 300 million years old? Huh? How? You tell me how. I don't know how. Was it because the future people came back to leave a bell for some other people? Did some people cross the Atlantic way before we think? Or was the whole thing a hoax? Well, I don't know, dude. Let me know in the comments what you think. Coming at number 7, we have the Dendera lights. There might have been light bulbs that were discovered in ancient Egypt. Yeah, everyone likes to jump on the bandwagon of Thomas Edison when we talk about the person who brought light to homes. But he really was just a con man who had an eye for a good patent and killed a prisoner in one of the most brutal executions ever because his ego was too big to let Nikola Tesla have the better version of technology. But when we start to flow back through time, we find that the Egyptians used to worship something called the Dendera lights. It would seem that hieroglyphs in the Hafar temple would show that the Egyptians used to be able to harness the power of glowing lights, and they might have used it to party. How could they have done something like this? Well, no one knows, and the markings might have just been art, but it could have been tech that was brought to them from the future. Might have been alien tech since ancient Egyptians are always associated with aliens. Coming in at number 6, we have the underwater pyramid. There has been so much footage of strange things flying around in the air that it shocks me that we haven't been introduced to even one alien yet. Honestly, I hope that it happens in my lifetime because this pandemic has just been such a drag. We need something to spice things up, but maybe we haven't been able to run into any space dudes because they have all been underwater. There are some people who think that all the aliens who come to visit come to a secret underwater base, and that's why we don't see them. And this pyramid that was found in Yonaguni, Japan might be hints to this. Now, at first glance, the people who came to look at it said that it's just a normal rock formation, nothing special about it. But then some people said that they found a massive knife down there. And then some other people said that knife was a fake and had nothing to do with a massive underwater pyramid. Then some people stated that there was art carved into the side of this pyramid, which hasn't been disproven yet. Okay, but it still could be. There are theories floating around that this could be connected to Atlantis, or that it could be a hotspot for alien visitors who brought some tech from the future to make a home base just outside of Japan. Coming in at number 5, we have the Nazca Lines. Oh, don't think that we're off the idea of aliens coming to Earth just yet. I mean, we're doing a list of artifacts from the future. There's going to be a lot of alien talk on this one. The Nazca Lines might be one of the the oldest and strangest discoveries in the area. They went unnoticed for thousands of years until the 1930s. This is mainly because you can only see them from the sky. They are massive lines that are seen running through the ground. They are made in a pretty primitive way by just moving the earth, which is traditionally red to showcase the white earth underneath. Now that doesn't seem like it came from the future at all. Well, this is where the future thing comes in. These lines were made over 2,000 years ago, and the question is, why did they make them? Some people think that this could have been a way to communicate with aliens or beings from the future. Other people think that this could have just been rituals to send a message to a god in order to have a good year of crops. Mind you, those gods might have been aliens from the future. Next on the list, we have the Arkalakori axe. I mean, this is really just an axe. What's so special about it? I could go buy an axe right now and it would do the same thing that it did thousands of years ago. It would chop. Well, unless you have a TikTok that's dedicated to chopping wood, then the axe is used to chop wood and rev a woman's libido. But what has put this axe on this list is the fact that it was made over 4,000 years ago and has a ton of strange markings in it all over it, and no one has been able to decipher them. There are 15 different symbols on it, which is very strange for this kind of tool. It would have just been used to chop wood. Why did someone put so much work into making it look nice? There's also the fact that the axe is very advanced for its era. Maybe the person who made it had knowledge from the future, or maybe they were just the best axe maker of their time and decided to deck out their axe with a bunch of cool drawings. Like, you know, if you're making a table for yourself today, you make the thing custom and cool as hell. Next, we have the lunar tacked disc. How did the Vikings become one of the most dominant warriors of their time? Was it weaponry? Was it the lack of empathy? Was it the way they would dress? Well, it might have been all of those things combined with the lunar tacked disc. This thing was basically the most advanced compass of its day. The thing could tell the Vikings how to cross vast oceans, which was a key part in how they were able to be such a dominant force. They would be able to venture far away from their homes and then pull up on some people and just start hacking and slashing. They could cut everyone's head off and really go to town on the whole area. They would take some prisoners, they would burn things to the ground. You didn't want to be on the receiving end of a Viking axe. But the way they were able to make these long ocean voyages without the fear of getting lost was through the lunar tacked disc. This thing was the most advanced compass of its day, and it could even work at night. This thing was able to somehow cast light onto the compass that would be similar to using a sundial during the day. Apparently it used magic crystals. These crystals might have come from the future. We have no idea really how they worked because we've never found one. Next on the list, we have the Baghdad battery. When was the first battery ever made? When did we figure out how to lock down the power of electricity and put it into a little area so that it could be used for Xbox controllers? Do those things still take batteries, or do they have rechargeable batteries now? For how long have we been seeing people control the power of lightning in a Duracell? Well, it turns out that we might have been able to do this for longer than you think. The Baghdad battery was discovered back in 1938, and trust me, it was turning some heads. It had a copper rod inside of it, and what some people are saying is electroplating. If this is true, that means that people back then were able to harness some juice into a clay pot. If this is possible, that means I could set up some clay pots in my home and charge my phone like that. I could get off the grid with a little bit of clay and copper. I like the sound of that. All right, next on the list, guys, we have the London Hammer. Okay, this is for sure the craziest one. Mind you, I know nothing about geology, so this might be normal, but the internet seems to think that this is a big deal, and who am I to deny them? The London Hammer seems to be a regular relic, some old hammer that a blacksmith probably used to make some tools and weapons. I mean, there is really nothing cool about that, and it definitely didn't come from the future, but then you find out that the hammer was found in some limestone that is 400 million years old. What does that mean? I don't really know. Does limestone that old just hang around and anything can get stuck in it? Or is it something that can only happen if the hammer got launched into it at the time? I have no clue, man, but some people seem to think that something spectacular happened here because people are constantly talking about how this is completely unexplained.